The title of the exhibition is Small Shields and Other Shapes, and it's fairly explanatory. I was thinking about the idea of a shield in the context of a physical object, something that has a shape and a size and other distinguishing details, something that's used in the context of defense. And there's some obvious associations with that. But I was also thinking about the shield as something intangible in the context of psychoanalysis and defensive mechanisms that we were all developing and using out of necessity during this period of time that was the pandemic. For me, making this work, I was working on all of the pieces at the same time and not really paying attention to which ones would develop or not. And it was a practical problem of working in my main studio, which is on the second floor of a building, and then the metal shop studio, which is some distance away, and my own dining room table. So, kind of these three spaces where I would have scraps of paper and piles of metal, and moving back and forth between those spaces while I was making the work would kind of contribute to this incidental vocabulary of a pile shifting or shapes moving in my car or things getting stacked on other things. So a lot of the shapes were cutouts and leftovers from more intentional works that I had imagined making, and it would just be the leftover oval or the leftover scrap of paper. And I just started to kind of coax those shapes together and quickly piece them together with masking tape, and then take those shapes and bring them over to the metal shop and cut those out of with use a plasma cutter, and bringing them back to my studio and painting them, and working on my dining room table with other scraps that were around the house, cut up envelopes and things like this. The relationship between paper and steel, as I'm talking about, is really alternating back and forth. So sometimes the work starts in steel, sometimes it starts in paper, and then kind of layering steel on top of paper, paper on top of steel is how the surface is developed. The larger panels, the black double panel and the purple double panel, developed out of pinned together paper cutouts that were leftovers and drops from other more intentional shapes I was attempting to make. And I was quickly piecing together these paper shapes with bits of masking tape and pushing them into vertical panels that sort of resembled signs or tattered banners or pennants. And then I was using the small painted pieces of mulberry paper to recall the masking tape that were in the original quick patterns, and paying attention to the quickness of how those shapes sort of shift and suggest they're kind of slightly moving, and the slowness of cutting and painting those surfaces. So I was really paying attention to those different speeds and frequencies and all of the work, and finding things quickly and then making them in a slower way. So the small steel panels that have tiny protrusions and kind of just hover against the wall, they have blank grounds. I wanted these to feel really uncomfortable. And these were also made with sort of scraps in the metal shop, or me trying to cut a shape or cut quickly, cut down a larger piece of steel. And so there would just be a hand cut or an off edge. And I wanted these to feel really uncomfortable, like a sore or some kind of unattractive aberration if you had something developing under your skin, and something like a difficulty that you had to learn to live with. And I wanted them to have a feeling of self reliance and stability that was also bound up with density and compression. The other thing that I think was quite a huge inevitable condition of around this work was just the reality of anxiety and multiple anxieties. And of course, there's so many ways to think about the relationship between space and anxiety, and our relationship to space and anxiety. And that could happen, in the context of one's home, in the context of one's neighborhood, going from point A to point B, a larger space like the one that we were all experiencing during this pandemic, and the layers of anxiety that were really stacked. So I think the shapes kind of are exploring that in a very small way. And that was part of the kind of engine of the project. The other thing that's evident in this body of work is there's a high degree of abstraction. So it was very important to me that there weren't really strong referential points outside of the work. So that was part of the heavy editing is, oh, this looks like this. It was rejected. Oh, this looks like this. It was rejected. And so finding shapes that didn't really look like something in our world was really important. But I think that connected to the idea of anxiety in space and in an internal space. So that's what those shapes kind of, I think, aligned with or were born of. It became a really practical exercise to lay down a symmetrical pattern of ovals and really just have some clear, easy decisions. For example, which color and how many ovals, and then think about responding to that without having a plan, but a very small response. So I think also part of the condition of this pandemic was the fatigue of decision making and the number of decisions and weighing all of the different unknowns on a daily basis and having those stacked. So these became somewhat of an antidote for that fatigue of just saying, I'm going to make this decision red. I'm going to make this decision after I see the red and to not overthink any of that. Their adjacency to each other and contingency with one another. They weren't about anything, but then they became all about the energy that they had together. And that was really exciting to me.